Hi guys. So today we're going to talk a little bit about biology as a first lecture, and we're going to kind of investigate a little bit more in depth what is the biology field. So let's start talking about what is biology. If we look at the word in itself, bio plus logy, what that means is literally the study of life. So whenever we talk about biology, you have to think that we're studying life. But what does that mean really? Like if you think about what define life is not that easy, right? Like it's not as easy to think what life is defined by. So I want to take 2 seconds, just pause the presentation and think about what do you think is a property of life. Think about yourself, your organism, plants outside of your house, your dog, your cat, whatever you, bacteria, germs, whatever. Think about properties that can define an organism that is alive. Just pause the presentation or take a few minutes to think about that. And probably you realize pretty fast that the when we try to defining life is not that easy. There might be many different factors that come in mind, like growth or bacteria that are interacting between each other, or things that are interacting with the environment, or molecules, or cells, or organism metabolism, in many different things. And that is all true. In fact, when you think about a biologist, the field is pretty vast. You can be a biologist if you study ecology, which is the interaction between environment and organism, or if you study ethology, which is the study of the behavior of the organism, or if you study physiology, or if you study anatomy, or if you are a genetist, or if you're a molecular biologist, or if you're a botanist. There are so many different fields within biology because it is a pretty vast field, since it studies something so complex like life. So don't feel bad if you had a hard time trying to figure out which properties of life, because it's very complex, it's very vast, and it can feel overwhelming. So we are going to look at just a few properties of life that are important when you study biology. The first one is order. What does that mean? Order is meaning the structure of a cell over an organism. So every organism has a specific order within himself. It doesn't matter if it's unicellular organism, like the example that is right here, right now. This is a paramecium, which is a protist. So it's one organism equal one cell. So this entire thing that you're seeing is one cell, but is also the organism in itself. It's not a bacterium, it's in fact a eukaryotic organism, which means has a nucleus inside its own cells, exactly like us, and is a grazer, meaning that it's going around and eats stuff to survive. But as you can tell, has a pretty defined structure and has an order within itself. And the same is if you look at multicellular organisms like ourselves, or animals in general, or plants. Everything has an order, has a structure, and is a sort as a and has some type of complexity. So that is definitely a characteristic of life. Another important characteristic of life is energy processing. So anytime that we are going to spend a lot of time actually talking about this throughout the semester, you are going to realize how much biology and chemistry are connected between each other. And the reality is that the flow of energy is what really fuels biology and living organism. So every organism needs energy to function. Some organisms are capable to make their own energy, like plants. But if we're talking about animals, we need to take energy from outside and then process it. So these bumblebee is taking his nectar, and that nectar is going to be processed to become energy for his cells. And the same is for these kids that are eating this healthy snack, and that is what is going to be processed and is going to become energy for their cells to function. And we're going to talk more about this when we're going to look at cellular respiration through in few weeks from now. Another important thing about life is definitely how complex the life can be, how complex and how diverse the organisms around us are, and how well adapted we are all are. So in this case is a classic example of evolutionary adaptation. I want you to look at these pictures and tell me if this yellow thing that flows around is an alga or an animal. So take a second, look at it very in detail, and tell me in your mind, we're not together of course, if you think this is an animal or is an alga. And yeah, this is an animal. This is a seahorse, and it's well adapted in his own environment. So it looks like the algae that are around him and behind him, but is not an algae, is an actual animal, and is very, very well adapted to his environment. And so this is definitely a characteristic, a property of life. Every organism that is around us is adapted to its own environment. Another important property of life is what is called regulation. We are regulating right now. Our bodies are regulating the function and our different functions, like I don't know, like temperature or pH or many different things that our body constantly try to keep stable. So the process of regulation is a process that happens constantly and is fueled by what we call a negative feedback. That is why you see that big negative sign inside the brain of the human, is because usually homeostasis and regulation, which is pretty much the same thing. So the pressure of the body to keep itself stable is really regulated by negative feedback. This little picture here, why do we sweat, is actually a video. It's a link to a video. If you click on it, it's going to go directly to it. And we are not going to watch it right now together, but I do encourage you to watch it. It's very well done, and it shows you very well how we regulate temperature and what happens when we can't regulate temperature very much, and what are the type of reactions that our body has to keep that temperature stable as much as possible. So definitely watch it. It's super short and very well done. So it's right there for you to take advantage. And so this is where it goes. If you click on it, and you can just watch it right there. Oops, and now of course it keeps going back. Sorry guys, let's see. Okay, so negative feedback, that is what I wanted to spend a few more minutes on it. So this is what happens usually. So if you look down here, that little balance, right, where is like variable and in homeostasis. So when you are in balance, you are stable. As soon as a stimulus comes, is going to make your variable changing. And so you're not going to be in balance anymore. You're actually going to be unbalanced. And what happens is that you being unbalanced is going to start a negative feedback where you are going to activate some sort of different type of pathway that is going through your body to go back to your original stimulus stability. So this is why it's called a negative feedback, because you are not pushing your organism to keep following that stimulus and keep producing whatever, either a hormone or different type of substances to keep going towards that stimulus, but it's quite the opposite. You're going to do everything in your power to go back to the original balance. So you're trying to go back to where your variable was, so in a instability, and not to be unbalanced. Okay, so this is why it's called negative feedback, not because it's something negative, but because your body is trying to go back to the original stability of whatever variable you're looking at. Can be temperature, can be pH, can be many different things. So sometimes hormones, so whatever. It doesn't matter what it is, that variable, but the mechanism is the same. Oops. Really likes that video. Okay, another important property of life is growth and development. We're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about this when we're going to talk about mitosis and then meiosis. So definitely growth and development are important part of life. We all do it in a way, and and is definitely something that things that are not alive don't do. Another important thing that is an important property of life is the response to the environment. So we are not alone. We are actually connected with the environment where we live or where we are, and there are constant interaction with that environment. And so this is an example of a plant that if you click on it, it's just I'm just going to play the first few seconds. So it's called a sensitive plant because it's a tag. If you touch it, it responds to it. It closes itself. And then see the tag. Yeah, you see it closes itself. So it's pretty neat. You can watch the entire video if you want. It's nothing more than them touching the plant, and the plant that it's called Mimosa pudica close itself. So it's in reaction of the environment, right? So it's we all are in connection, we in interaction with the environment, and we respond to stimuli like this one. Another important property of life is reproduction. We all do it, right? And not just the multicellular organism. Actually, if you look at unicellular organism, this is again our friend the paramecium that we saw at the beginning when we looked at the order, like at the complexity of the cell. They also reproduce themselves. They just don't need a partner. They do this through a process that is called binary fission. So they clone themselves pretty much. And we're going to talk more about this. But either if it's asexual, like in this case, or sexual, like in our case, we all reproduce ourselves. We all want to have offspring, and from insects to plants to humans, so we all do that. So definitely this is a property of life. So as you can tell, biology is a pretty complex and big and very diverse field, and it can be overwhelming because there's so many different things that you can study and analyze and look at when you are trying to be a biologist. That a good way to feel less overwhelmed is to look at some unifying themes that go across the field of biology. We recognize, when we're going to look at, mainly five of these themes. You can also call this the foundations of biology. And the first one is organization, information, energy and matter, they go together, interactions, and of course, evolution. I'm going to look at each of them briefly. We are going to go over pretty much all of these themes throughout the semester in more detail. So let's start with organization. What does that mean? What does organization means? As we said at the beginning, there's biology is so complex, and it doesn't, like, already when we looked at property of life, we can already have a sense that it's not just the one thing that you are focusing on, but there are many different things, and the complexity vary a lot. So when we want to address biology, it's good to think about how we can organize the different level of biology. And so if we think about that, we can think that the biggest level of possible of biology of this organizational level of biology is the biosphere. And then if you dig a little bit deeper and you pick one section inside your biosphere, you're going to see what the ecosystem, right? So an ecosystem is, the biosphere is made up of many multiple different ecosystem. And an example of ecosystem that we have right now here is, for example, the coral reef. It doesn't have to be only the coral reef, it's just one example. Desert can be another one. The Alps is another one. So any type of really ecological system, so where you have many different things that are connected between each other. It doesn't have to be only live things. In ecosystem, you're going to have also things that are abiotic, so that are not alive at all, like water, rocks, sands, many different things. And they're all together in one big system, ecological system. If you look in the ecosystem in a little bit more detail, let's keep this example of the coral reef, since I choose this one. We can see that inside every ecosystem there are different communities. So community, for example, in this case, we can see there are different species of fish that are together in this community. There are some corals, there are some algae, and they're all interacting between each other. So this will be the level 3 of your organizational level of biology. If we go even more in detail, so as you can tell, we're going from big to small. The fourth level is the population. So population is only one specific type. So in this case, like, I choose the clownfish, okay? So it's a population of clownfish. It's a species that live in the same time and space. So our population of clownfish. The next level is the actual organism. So as you can tell, now we're going more in detail, right? We're going to a different level of organization. So now we can focus just on the organism. But that is not the smallest level when we think about biology. We can go smaller. We can think about looking just at tissues or organs. These are the tissues of the gills of this little clownfish, for example. And we can even go smaller. In fact, in this class, we're pretty much going to focus only on this level of organization, which is the cell. So all many different cells are going to form tissues, and many different tissues are going to form organs, and many different organs are going to form your organism, and so on. Many different organisms are going to form population, and then you can go up in your organizational level, but now we're going down. And so after the cells, the smaller organizational step is definitely the molecules. So many different molecules can form cells, and many different atoms together can form molecules. In this class, we are going to focus only, pretty much only, on step 9, 8, and 7. We're really going to look at the molecular part of biology. So Bio 181 really focus on the cells, the molecules, and the atoms, and specifically in the cells and the interaction between cells and what happens inside our cells. So that is what Bio 181 is about. But that is just the first theme when we look at biology. The second theme, which we're going to talk a lot about this, of course, is information. What does that mean? Not just the normal information. What this means is our information, our code is in our DNA. And this information, this code is transferred through a very specific process that is called gene expression, that goes through two specific processes: transcription and translation. As you can tell in this picture, it doesn't matter if you're a bacteria or a eukaryotic cell. We will talk about this more in detail. For now, just look at the big picture. It doesn't matter if you're a human or you're a bacterium. We all do it. We all do transcription, we all do translation. Of course, there are going to be differences. As you can tell right now, the bacterium cell doesn't have the nucleus. The eukaryotic cell does have a nucleus, and we're going to talk more about this when we're talking about prokaryotes versus eukaryotes, which prokaryotes are bacteria. But for now, just know that our information, so the code, the genetic code, the information that makes you who you are, is carried in your DNA and is being expressed through two processes: transcription and translation. And we're going to talk about this so much, so don't worry about if you feel a little overwhelmed right now, because we're going to come back to this. For now, I just want you to know that information is connected with your DNA, and not just for you that you're a human, for all different living organisms. And so, as a reminder and kind of like a synthetic way to see it, DNA is oops, don't know what happened, is who you are. Okay, it makes who you are. So that is where your information is. Your code, your genetic code, is carried in that DNA that is inside your nucleus if you're a human, and it is not inside the nucleus if you are a bacterium. The third theme, super important, like we said before, energy is a very important part of living organisms. So is energy and matter. So a classic example is, really what we're looking here is the energy flow. So a classic example is photosynthesis. So our plants, algae, are taking the light energy and they're transforming this light energy into sugar, so organic energy. And that sugar, that organic energy, is going to become food for organisms like us that cannot make their own energy. And so that sugar, that organic energy is going to become food that we buy at the supermarket. Okay, and we will talk more about this. And then another theme is interactions. So like I said before, we're not alone, and being alive doesn't mean that you are just your own organism and that's it. We are constantly in interaction with other organisms, with other, or with the environment in itself. So interaction is definitely an important theme of biology. There is an entire field that study this, which is ecology, and and I'm talking about in this case the interaction between organisms, but there are also all the interactions within an organism that we are going to address and study in this class throughout the semester. So within your cells, so there are also those interactions that are super important, and they're part of this theme, of course. Last but not least, definitely is the evolution. Evolution is one of the most important theme. In fact, I call this the core theme of biology. And the reason why is because evolution really explains unity and diversity of life. So if we look around us, you can tell how diverse we are, not just the human species, but everything that is alive. We are very different, and from bacterium to humans to dog to sheep to plants to algae to fish to whatever, you name it, we are all very diverse. But if you look deeper at the cellular level, there are some things that are absolutely the same across all living species. And we will talk about this throughout the course of the semester. So, evolution is the process that accounts and explains why we're so different, but also so have so many things that unify all of us. When we talk about evolution, we have to understand what the term means. And what that means is simply change over time. That's it. Evolution is that, is change over time. This change is made by mutation. And the mutations that occur in life are absolutely random. So mutations are random, and we will talk more about this. They are phenomenon that happens all the time in your DNA. So going back to information, right, the core of who you are, and they can happen, and they are not necessarily negative, but they are random and they happen all the time. What is not random is natural selection. So, natural selection is the mechanism of evolutionary adaptation because it is the environment that is selecting for the propagation of certain traits among naturally occurring variant traits. So, what does that mean? What does that mean is an organism is going to have, every organism are going to have their own traits, and these traits are passed to the offspring, but natural selection is the mechanism that is going to select for certain traits that are going to be advantageous or not depending on the environment where that specific population is. So let's look at an example. For example, parents are going to pass. So in this picture here, we have different butterflies, right? The blue and the red. We're going to have parents that are going to pass the blue parents are going to pass their traits to their offspring. So they're going to make them blue, different shades of blue because the mom is lighter than the dad. And the same is going to happen with the red butterflies. They're going to pass some of these traits to their offspring, right? But then these butterflies don't live on their own. They live in an environment where they're going to interact between each other, and they're going to be in an environment where there are limited resources because that is just how it is in nature. So they're going to be presented with lack of food, sometimes lack of habitat, meaning the habitat is maybe too small to have all of these butterflies and to keep them all safe. Lack of mates if there are too many, or also the presence of predators and might take some down. So not all these individuals will survive and reproduce, only some of them. And if you click here, there are more information about this concept. So what that means is only the butterfly that have the best adaptation to their environment are going to survive more than others. And these butterflies are the ones that are going to pass their traits to the next offspring. And so that is how evolution occurs, because it's change over time, like I was saying, and is connected with natural selection. You would not have natural selection, and you would not have, therefore, evolution if you would not have change. And change is that random mutation that occur originally. Okay? So the fact that you have different traits, some butterfly are red, some butterfly are blue, that is your mutation. That is random. It happens all the time. If there is no mutation, if there is no difference, there is nothing that the nature that you can select for, because we are all going to look the same. So this is another example, for example, on how natural selection works in a clear example. So you are going to have a population of mice that, because of a random mutation, some are white and some are black, okay? That is random. That happened. There is no reason, there is no will for why these mice, some are white and some are black. That is just how it is. They moved to a new area, all of them, and now this new area, the rock where they are, is very, very dark. So now is when natural selection is going to happen, because as you can tell, if you live in an environment where the substrate where you live is very dark, which are the mice that have an advantage, the white or the dark? Right, the dark one. What does that mean? It means that if a bird comes, it's going to most likely hunt and eat more of the white than the black, just because he can see better the white compared to the black over the rock. So what that means? It means that now the white mice, or the 10 mice, whatever, the one that are like lighter, are going to be eaten at a higher frequency compared to the black mice, which means that they're going to survive less, they're going to reproduce less, and therefore they're going to leave less offspring compared to the black mice. So over the course of time, remember, evolution is change over the course of time. Over the course of time, the mice that reproduce the most are going to pass more their trait to the next generation, and the ones that are going to reproduce the most are going to be the black mice, because of this of natural selection. And therefore, over the course of generation, you are going to have that the black mice are going to have a higher fraction compared to the previous generation. Okay, so it's really important that you remember mutations are random, and those are what cause diversity. Natural selection, it's not random, it's selecting in compared to the natural, to the environment. So you're going to be selected, your traits are going to be selected if they're in connection with the environment where you live. And so this is a great video that I really encourage you to watch. It's called The Making of the Fetus, Natural Selection and Adaptation. It does the example, is actually the example of the mice that we just looked at, but they show you the research. It's very well done, and I really, really encourage you to watch it because we will have some examples and some questions in your exam about this part. So go ahead and watch it. So, okay, great. So biology is the study of life, and we looked at all the properties of life, and we looked at the theme of biology, and we know now the biology is very diverse, it's a very big field, and it's amazing, right? It's so complex. How do we study something so complex? How can we be sure that we're doing a good job um, studying the complexity of life? So I want this to be very clear to everyone. Biology is a rigorous science. So it's not a makeup thing, right? We follow a very rigorous method, and this method is called the scientific method. Not just biologists, a lot of scientists do. So, science in general follows this method that is called the scientific method. You do need to know this, and you do need to know this in the order. And I don't want you to just memorize it, I want you to understand what this is. So the scientific method is based on observation. So we make an observation, right, of a natural phenomenon or an organism that is doing something, whatever that is. And then we're going to ask a question about this observation that we just observe. Based on the questions, we are going to develop an hypothesis or a prediction, and this hypothesis is what this is an explanation. Okay, so based on my knowledge, I'm going to formulate an hypothesis, which means I'm going to formulate an explanation of the phenomenon that I just observed. Okay, so if I see something, I ask myself a question, and then I'm going to give myself an explanation. Okay, so it's not a guess, it's not a prediction, it's a simple explanation based on my knowledge or the knowledge that I have. Once I have this hypothesis, I'm going to formulate also my prediction, and I'm going to test my hypothesis. What does that mean? It means I'm going to do a series of experiments that are going to allow me to see if my hypothesis is supported or not. Once I do my experiment, I'm going to analyze my results, and only if I have my only at the end, when I'm done with my results, I'm going to record my results, and I'm going to say, okay, my results are supporting my hypothesis or they're not supporting my hypothesis. And then after that, I'm going to make a conclusion. Okay. Often what happens is I'm going to have new questions and new hypotheses, and I'm going to test new things, and my conclusion are going to fuel hypotheses of other scientists, and we're going to share our conclusion with other scientists. So it's an ongoing process. Okay, I want to spend a little bit of time making sure you understand the difference between hypothesis and theory. So hypothesis, as I was saying, is an explanation based on observations and based on assumptions. Okay, so based on my knowledge, my assumptions, my observation, I'm going to have an explanation of what I think that is happening, and then I have to test it. Okay, I have to test it to understand if my hypothesis is supported or not. When an hypothesis is verified and confirmed, then can become a theory. So the concept of theory in science, so the scientific theory, is such a broad concept and so much broader than an hypothesis, but is very, very robust. So it's the closest thing to the truth that a scientist is going to have. No scientists are going to ever tell you this is the truth, this is it, because as I said, science is an ongoing process. But a theory is as close as possible to that. It means that has been supported many, many, many times, and you have many, many different hypotheses that have been verified and confirmed, and once that happens, you have a theory. So a good example of a theory is evolution. Evolution is an example of a theory because it's supported, like the scientific um, um, the scientists feels very, very strong about evolution. So we have so many um, um, mm, proofs and so many hypotheses that have been supported over the course of time that are making um, us being confident about evolution. Okay, so make sure you understand the difference. Is something that you struggle with it, so make sure you know what is an hypothesis, what is a theory, and how the scientific method works. And I'm more than happy to go over more details with you and try to think about different examples. So my suggestion is to go, try to apply the scientific method to your normal life. Like, go outside and maybe your garden is not growing, and so you that is an observation, and you can ask your question, why my flowers are not growing this time of the year. And then you can have an hypothesis, an explanation why that is not happening. Then you have to do a test, right, to support your hypothesis, collect the results, and then you get your then you can make your conclusions. So I want to conclude the in this lecture of today saying again that science is an ongoing process. It's a very rigorous process, and it takes a lot of time and knowledge to make science, to make a good science. And during this semester, we're going to look at specifically to the molecular level of our cells, um, um, of how our cells interact between each other. And I hope you're going to enjoy this semester and to have fun learning and dig deeper in the in biology. Bye guys.